بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Alhamdulillah, we completed the chapter of Mashhur, and today also marks the 20th session. So up to this point, the minimum that you should know from all the lessons that we completed is you should know the names of the main scholars who wrote books before Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah. And then you should also know the differences between Hadith, Khabar and Athar. Like that, you must know the definition of mutawatir, the conditions of mutawatir, the types of mutawatir according to Hanafis, the types of mutawatir according to the Muhaddithin, the emphasis that the Hanafis place on mutawatir in comparison to the Muhaddithin. You also need to know the types of ilm that you get, then the type of ilm that is obtained from tawatur. You also need to know the definition of mashhur according to Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah, and the definition of mashhur according to Ulama ibn Manda rahimahullah and Ulama ibn Salah rahimahullah. You must also know the different meanings of mashhur and the different meanings of mustafil, and you need to know very well the definition of mashhur according to the Hanafis and the ruling of mashhur according to the Hanafis. So those are 15 different questions which you should be able to answer. If you are questioned about it, you should be able to answer it on the spot. So please do quiz yourself and see how well you know all of these. If you do not know any of these well, then please go back and revise it. And if you want, and this here is only voluntary, and you will also probably need to take out a full hour or two, then please write these down as official questions and then make it as a test. So then you write down the answers, obviously without looking in the book and without listening to the recordings. You write down the answers and you send it back to me, inshallah. So this here is not compulsory, but if you do it, then inshallah I will be able to gauge your understanding, and I will be able then to explain again something that probably may have been misunderstood. Also, obviously, I'm not going to judge you, and your objective also, it should not be just to impress me. So it's no use that you look in the book or you listen to the recordings and then you get all 15 correct. But meantime, if the reality is that you only know much less, so if you have to do it correctly, or if you have to do it properly without looking in a book and without listening to the recordings, then even if you only get 5 or 6 correct, or even if you only get 2 or 3 correct for that matter, but you wrote the answers honestly, then it is absolutely fine. So in that way, I will then inshallah be able to determine how I can get you to learn and understand everything better. You know, because this year is online, so I don't know how much you understand, but I would really want you to understand all of this properly and in detail. So by conducting this unofficial test, you will inshallah insist me in this regard. And as I said, that this year is just voluntary, so if you don't get time, then it is absolutely fine. Then besides all of those answers, you also need to know by heart and be able to fluently read the following text of Nukhbatul Fikr. Alhamdulillahi alladhi lam yazal aliman qadira wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammad alladhi arsalahu ila an-nasi bashira wa nadhira wa ala ali Muhammad wa sahbihi wa sallama tasliman kathira. أما بعد فإن التصانيف في اصطلاح أهل الحديث قد كثرت وبسطت واختصرت، فسألني بعض الإخوان أن ألخص له المهم من ذلك، فأجبته إلى سؤاله رجاء الاندراج في تلك المسالك، فأقول الخبر إما أن يكون له طرق بلا عدد معين، أو مع حصر بما فوق الاثنين، أو بهما أو بواحد. فالأول المتواتر المفيد للعلم اليقيني بشروطه، والثاني المشهور وهو المستفيض على رأي. Then, so this here is the text of the original matan of Nukhbatul Fikr. So after the relevant and applicable words, you must be able to explain from memory the gist of what Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimullah mentioned in Nuzha an-Naḍar, and a brief summary of all that I explained. If you can do that, then alhamdulillah, you are really deriving great benefit from this book. To continue with the text, Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah, he says, وَالثَّالِثُ الْعَزِيزُ وهو ألا يرويه أقل من اثنين عن اثنين وسمي بذلك إما لقلة وجوده وإما لكونه عز أي قوي بمجيئه من طريق أخرى. That the third type is Azīz. So the first was mutawatir, the second was mashhur, and now the third is Azīz. What is Azīz? وَهُوَ أَلَّا يَرْوِيَهُ أَقَلُّ مِنْ اثْنَيْنِ عَنِ اثْنَيْنِ. It is where not less than two narrators narrate from two others. So Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah, in this chapter we're starting the second type of Khabrul Wahid, and that is Azīz. Now in this short chapter, Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah, he explains quite a few points. So he explains the definition of Azīz, then the reason why it is called Azīz, the verb from which Azīz is derived. He does a refutation of what he saw as errors of previous scholars, and he also concludes with an example. So you will notice how the structure of this chapter differs greatly from that of the previous two definitions. So Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah, he says, وَالثَّالِثُ الْعَزِيزُ وَهُوَ أَلَّا يَرْوِيَهُ أَقَلُّ مِنْ اثْنَيْنِ عَنِ اثْنَيْنِ. That the third is Azīz, and it is not that way not less than two narrate from two others. So this is the definition that Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah is giving for the term Azīz. But this definition of Azīz that Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah presents here in Nuzha an-Naḍar, this here is not precise. Why it's not precise? Because according to this definition, it states that less than two narrators should not narrate from two. So what's the impression that you get from this? It conveys the impression that there must be two narrators in the beginning or the higher end of the sanad, isn't it? So that's the literal meaning, that less than two narrators are not narrating from two. So on top, at the higher end of the sanad, you have two narrators, and then from them you don't have less than two narrators who are narrating. But for a narration to be Azīz, there can be two narrators anywhere in the chain of transmission. So therefore, a better definition is أقل ما يكون في طبقة من طبقات السند الراويان. That the least amount of narrators that you have in any link from the links of the chain is two narrators. So if there are more than two narrators in the other links, then that's not an issue. Because you remember I told you previously that we always look at the weakest link. That's number one. So when you want to judge a sanad, when you want to grade a chain of transmission, you look at the weakest link and you look at the lowest number. So you can have 1 million people, and obviously this is just for an example. There is no narration ever like this here, but just to show you, you can have 1 million people, and from them 1 billion people who are narrating, and then from them hundreds of thousands, and then only two, and then again 1 million, and again 1 billion. So in order to grade this, you look at the lowest number, you look at that link where there's only two. You don't look at the fact that there's these huge numbers in majority of the links and it's only this one link. No, in order to grade a sanad, you look at that link which has the lowest number. So in short, Azīz, according to Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah, is a narration that has the least amount of only two narrators in one link, and it does not have less than two narrators in any other link. So this is what you should remember, inshallah, that if there is a least amount of only two narrators, then such a narration will be Azīz. This is the definition of Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah. So Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah claims that there must be a minimum of two narrators for a narration to be Azīz. However, we discussed under the discussion of mashhur in lesson 17 that scholars before Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah, such as Alama ibn Manda rahimahullah and Alama ibn Salah rahimahullah, and even scholars who came after Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah, like Kamal ibn Abi Sharif rahimahullah, etc., they all claim that for a narration to qualify as mashhur, there must be 4 or more narrators. So So I explained all of this in detail in lesson 17, you remember. So if there are only 3 narrators, then in contrast to what Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah is mentioning here, according to these scholars, this narration will not be considered as mashhur. Rather, they say that if there are only 3 narrators, then the narration will be Azīz. So those scholars, they say that for a narration to qualify as Azīz, there must be a minimum of 2 or 3 narrators. You can see the difference between what those scholars say and what Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah say. Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah is saying that for a narration to be Azīz, there must be at least 2 narrators. The least amount in any link must be 2 narrators. But those scholars are saying that there must be either 2 narrators or 3 narrators. So if you have a chain which has only 3 narrators in one link, according to Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah, it's going to be mashhur. But according to all of those scholars, it's going to be Azīz. So the exact words of Allama ibn Manda rahimahullah, his student related it, and it's also quoted by Allama ibn Salah rahimahullah. He mentioned it like this here: فَإِذَا رَوَى عَنْهُمْ رَجُلَانِ وَثَلَاثَةً. Can you see? رَجُلَانِ وَثَلَاثَةً وَاشْتَرَكُوا فِي حَدِيثٍ يُسَمَّى عَزِيزًا. If 2 or 3 narrated from them, and they are partners in a narration, they're all narrating it together, yusamma azizan, then this here is called Azīz. And he says, فَإِذَا رَوَى الْجَمَاعَةُ عَنْهُمْ حَدِيثًا سُمِّيَ مَشْهُورًا. If a group, that means if 4 or more narrated it, then that narration is called mashhur. Now here in the statement, although Allama ibn Manda rahimahullah uses a wow, he says rajulani wa thalatha. Sheikh Abdul Fattah Abu Ghudda rahimahullah, he says that the wow has the meaning of the word aw. So therefore, it does not mean that there must be 2 and 3 narrators in one link. Rather, it means that the minimum number of narrators could either be 2 or 3. So do you understand that? So Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah confines the meaning of Azīz to a narration that has a minimum of 2 narrators in a link. And scholars before him, they regarded a narration with 2 or 3 narrators in any of the links to be Azīz. And if there are 4 or more, then that narration is mashhur. So the outcome is that if a narration is transmitted by 3 narrators, then according to Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah, such a narration will be mashhur. And according to Allama ibn Manda rahimahullah and Allama ibn Salah rahimahullah, such a narration will be Azīz. Now since Allama ibn Salah rahimahullah, he quoted the words of Allama ibn Manda rahimahullah, most scholars that base their works on Muqaddama ibn Salah, they followed that view of Allama ibn Salah rahimahullah, that if there are 2 or 3 narrators in any link, then the narration will be Azīz. Therefore, it can be safely said that probably all the scholars before Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah, they did not restrict Azīz to only 2 narrators, but they all accepted that a narration that is transmitted with 3 narrations, with 3 narrators, that will also be called Azīz. So this shows that Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah is not simply presenting definitions and explaining terminologies, rather he is also attempting to refine the science. So he specified mashhur with 3, and he specifies with 3 or more, and he specifies Azīz with 2 narrators in any link. But remember, this here is only in the 9th century, because Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah, as we mentioned, he commenced with Nukhbatul Fikr in 812 Hijrah, and he continued to revise Nuzha an-Naḍar right up until his demise. But after Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah, all the scholars, they did not accept this refinement of his. So it's not that everyone who came after Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah just accepted that, okay, Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah is specifying it, so we'll just follow that. They did not follow his suggestion, if you may call it, of specifying mashhur and Azīz in this manner. So that means that even after the 9th century, many scholars continued to follow the view of Allama ibn Manda rahimahullah. Those of you who have memorized Baykuniyya, you remember that the author and he passed away in the year 108 Hijri. He said, عزيز مروي اثنين أو ثلاثة مشهور مروي فوق ما ثلاثة. That Azīz is a narration that's transmitted by two or three. مروي اثنين أو ثلاثة. And مشهور مروي فوق ما ثلاثة. مشهور is narrated by more than three. So you can see 1080. That means after Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah, almost actually more than 2 centuries after him, yet he is not following Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah. But then in order to give preference to the view of Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah, Sheikh Abdul Sattar Abu Ghudda rahimahullah, he rephrased the statement of Baiquniya, Azizun marwiyu thnaini la thalatha, mashhurun marwiyun ani thalatha. So Aziz is narrated by two. It's not that which is transmitted with three. And mashhur is narrated from three. So therefore, probably all of the scholars before Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah and some scholars after Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah, they regarded a narration that has three narrators to be Aziz. So do you understand this point? Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah is possibly the first person giving the definition like this. Now Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah then explains the reason why such a narration is called Aziz, and he gives two possibilities for its name. So the first is وَسُمِّيَ بِذَلِكَ إِمَّا لِقِلَّةِ وُجُودِهِ, that it's called Aziz either because of its rare existence. So Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah is claiming that the reason why narrations with the least amount of two narrators is called Aziz, and this is because the word Aziz in this case will be from Bab Daraba Yadribu. So therefore it has the meaning of Qalla wa Nadura, something that it's little or rare. So it is called Aziz because there are very few ahadith which are Aziz. So this is one reason why such narrations will be called Aziz, because of the minimal amount of narrations like these. Something which could support this reason is that besides using the word Aziz according to how we explained thus far, scholars they also use the phrase Azizul Ḥadīth, and they use this phrase Azizul Ḥadīth for a person who narrated very few ahadith. So Alama ibn Adi rahimahullah, for example, he uses this term Azizul Ḥadīth many times in his Kamil. For example, he says وَأَخُوهُ الزُّبَيْرُ بْنُ الْخُرَيْثِ Azizul Ḥadīth. So you can see his brother Zubair ibn al-Khurayth is also Azizul Ḥadīth. That means he narrated just a few narrations. وَلَا أَعْرِفُ لَهُ كَثِيرَ الْحَدِيثِ. I do not know many of his ahadith. Likewise, when speaking about Huwaytib, then Alama ibn Kathir rahimahullah, he mentioned lahu hadithun wahid, and then he explains that narration. Imam Bukhari, Imam Muslim, Imam Nasai rahimahullah, they have narrated it. At the end he says وَهُوَ مِنْ عَزِيزِ الْحَدِيثِ. So because he narrated a few narrations, he's called Azizul Ḥadīth. And besides Alama ibn Adi rahimahullah and Alama ibn Kathir rahimahullah, there were numerous other scholars too who use the term Azizul Ḥadīth. In fact, this term, because there are so few narrations with just one or with just two or three narrators in a link, and there are so many narrators who narrated just a few narrations, the term Azizul Ḥadīth has been used more compared to the term Aziz. So although here in Nuzha an-Naḍar what we are learning the term Aziz, and Aziz means, according to Hafiz ibn Hajar, that at the least amount of narrators are two narrators in any link. And according to others, if there are two or three in any link, then such a narration will be called Aziz. So that's what we are learning here in Nuzha an-Naḍar. But another term which earlier scholars used was Azizul Ḥadīth. And Azizul Ḥadīth has been used more by earlier scholars. Why? Because there are more narrators that narrated just a few narrations. And there are very few narrations like this which has only two or three narrators. So that's the one possibility, that it's called Azīz because it's something which is very rare, it's very difficult, or it's very seldom that you will find a narration like this. The second possibility that Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah mentioned is وَإِمَّا لِكَوْنِهِ عَزَّ أي قوي بمجيئه من طريق أخرى. Or it is called Azīz because it is strengthened, meaning it becomes stronger because of it being transmitted via another path. So this means that it's possible that the word Azīz is derived from Bab Fataha Yaftahu. In this case, it will have the meaning of Qawiya washtadda, something that is strengthened and something that becomes stronger. For example, in Surah Yasin, in verse number 14, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِذْ أَرْسَلْنَا إِلَيْهِمُ اثْنَيْنِ فَكَذَّبُوهُمَا فَعَزَّزْنَا بِثَالِثٍ. So you can see, فَعَزَّزْنَا بِثَالِثٍ فَقَالُوا إِنَّا إِلَيْكُمْ مُرْسَلُونَ. That we sent two prophets to them, they rejected both of them. فَعَزَّزْنَا بِثَالِثٍ. So we strengthened them with a third one. And فَقَالُوا إِنَّا إِلَيْكُمْ مُرْسَلُونَ. They said, we are sent to you. So the reason why a narration with two narrators is called Azīz is because one narrator corroborates and strengthens the narration of the other narrator. Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah, he mentioned these two possibilities of why a report will be called Azīz. But besides these, the word could also come from Bab Nasara Yansuru. In this case, it will have the meaning of ghalaba, to overpower. So for example, in Surah Sad, in verse number 23, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَقَالَ أَكْفِلْنِيهَا وَعَزَّنِي فِي الْخِطَابِ. So he said that give it into my charge, and he overpowered him in speech. He overpowered me in speech. وَعَزَّنِي فِي الْخِطَابِ. He overpowered me in speech. And it is because of this meaning that we refer to a leader also as Azīz, because a leader is a person who overpowers others, isn't it? So the word Azīz, it's used in the meaning of leader in Surah Yusuf in verse number 78. قالوا يا أيها العزيز إن له أبا شيخا كبيرا. So you can see أيها العزيز, they said, oh Azīz, oh leader. إن له أبا شيخا كبيرا. He has a father who's a very old man. And in verse number 88, فلما دخلوا عليه قالوا يا أيها العزيز مسنا وأهلنا الضر. So when they came to him, they said, Azīz, we and our family are struck by distress. Ubayd ibn al-Abras, he said, Man azza bazza, that whoever is in power is at liberty to do as he wills. It is also in this meaning that the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Al-Azīz. So in many verses of the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala refers to himself as Azīz, because what's the meaning of Azīz, the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? وَهُوَ الْغَالِبُ الْقَوِيُّ الَّذِي لَا يُغْلَبُ. That it is such a person who is predominant, the most powerful, who can never be overpowered. So this is also one meaning of the word Azza, and in this case it's from Bab Nasara Yansuru, Azza Ya'uzzu. So if you consider this meaning, then a narration with just 2 or 3 narrators in a link is called Azīz, because it overpowers narrations with just one link. Now Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah clarifies, and he says, وَلَيْسَ شَرْطًا لِلصَّحِيحِ خِلَافًا لِمَنْ زَعَمَهُ. That it is not a condition for Sahih. A narration does not have to have a minimum of 2 narrators in order to be authentic, because there are so many authentic narrations that are transmitted by only one narrator. In fact, there are more than 200 solitary reports that are found in Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim. So that shows that Imam Bukhari rahimahullah and Imam Muslim rahimahullah, they did not only regard narrations which has only one narrator in any link to be authentic, they actually regarded it to be so good and of such high status that they could even cite it in their respective books, where they were choosing the cream of the crop and the most authentic of narrations. So just like mashhur, Azīz can also either be authentic, or it could be weak, it could be good, it could be extremely weak, and it could also be fabricated. Now, although this here is the preferred view, Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimullah felt that some scholars are of the view. So here he is, it's the assumption of Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimullah that he feels that some scholars are of the view that a narration can only be authentic if it is Azīz. So what does it mean? A narration can only be authentic if it is transmitted by a minimum of 2 narrators. So he says, خِلَافًا لِمَنْ زَعَمَهُ, as opposed to whoever claims it. And who claims it? وَهُوَ Abu Ali al-Jubba'i min al-Mu'tazila. It is Abu Ali al-Jubba'i from the Mu'tazila. So this person, Abu Ali, his name was Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, and he was the leading scholar of the Mu'tazila and the leader of the Jubba'i sect. So an interesting thing is that his name and his father's name is the same as the leader of the Salafis, Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab. So he was popularly known as Abu Ali al-Jubba'i, and he lived between the years 235 Hijri to 303 Hijri. Now, how does Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah know that the leader of the Mu'tazilites held this view? So from his Nukat on Muqaddamah ibn Salah, we understand that Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah, he obtained this view of Abu Ali from Abu al-Hasan Muhammad ibn Ali al-Mu'tazili. So he quoted in his book Al-Mu'tamad, فصل في أن الخبر لا يرد إذا كان راويه واحدا, that a narration will not be rejected if it is only transmitted by one person. So this is what does Abu al-Husayn Muhammad ibn Ali al-Mu'tazili, what is writing in Al-Mu'tamad. So he says, ذهب جل القائلين بأخبار الآحاد إلى قبول الخبر وإن رواه واحد, that majority of those who accept akhbar al-ahad, they would accept a narration even if it is transmitted by only one person. Now he transmits the view of the leader of Abu Ali. So he says, وَقَالَ Abu Ali. Now listen to his words very carefully. إِذَا رَوَى الْعَدْلَانِ خَبْرًا وَجَبَ الْعَمَلُ بِهِ, that if 2 people narrate a narration, if 2 people transmit a narration, وَجَبَ الْعَمَلُ بِهِ, it is compulsory to practice upon it. وَإِنْ رَوَاهُ وَاحِدٌ فَقَطْ لَمْ يَجُزِ الْعَمَلُ بِهِ. So until here, if only one person has to transmit it, then it's not permissible to be to practice upon it. Had the statement of Abu Ali stopped here, then it would the quotation or it would be correct for Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah to attribute this view to him. However, his statement does not stop here, it continues. He says, لم يجوز العمل به إلا بأحد الشروط. It will not be permissible to practice upon it unless it fulfills one of the following conditions. منها يعذره ظاهر أو عمل بعض الصحابة. It must be in conformity with some of the actions of the Sahaba, or ijtihad, or it must conform with ijtihad, or يكون منتشرا, or it must be a well-known narration. So looking at these exact words of Abu Ali, we cannot claim that Abu Ali insisted that there only has to be 2 narrators, because he accepts narrations which is transmitted by only one narrator as long as it has some support. Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah, he then takes the name of Imam Hakim rahimahullah. So he says, وَإِلَيْهِ يُومِئُ كَلَامُ الْحَاكِمِ أَبِي عَبْدِ اللَّهِ فِي عُلُومِ الْحَدِيثِ حيث قال الصحيح أن يرويه الصحابي الزائل عنه اسم الجهالة بأن يكون له راويان ثم يتداوله أهل الحديث إلى وقتنا كالشهادة على الشهادة. In the speech, the statement of Hakim rahimullah that he mentions in his book Ulum al-Hadith, Ma'rifah Ulum al-Hadith, it points towards us, it indicates to this year that he also necessitates and puts it as a condition. He stipulates that a narration has to be transmitted by 2 people, then only it will be considered as authentic. So حيث قال, where he says الصحيح أن يرويه الصحابي الزائل عنه اسم الجهالة, that sahih is that which is transmitted by a companion الزائل عن اسم الجهالة, the literal meaning removed from ignorance. So it means he's not a Sahabi that is unknown. بأن يكون له راويان, and from him is two narrators. Then the people of Hadith, they circulated until our time. So let us analyze the statement of Imam Hakim rahimahullah. He's saying الصحيح أن يرويه الصحابي الزائل عن اسم الجهالة, right? So Sahih is that which a Sahabi who's not unknown transmits. بأن يكون له راويان, from him there is two narrators. So focus on the marja' of the dhamir, that this word lahu, the antecedent of the pronoun. Where does this lahu, the who, where does it go back to? So look now at footnote number 3. Shaykh Nuruddin Atr, he says, Muradul Hakim bihada ayakuna lis-sahabiyyi. So lahu, the antecedent of that pronoun, the marja' of the zamir lahu, to who is it going back? It's going back to the sahabi. So بِأَيَّكُونَ لَهُ رَاوِيَانِ, that the sahabi has two people who are transmitting from him. لِكَيْ تَزُولَ عَنُ الْجَهَالَةِ, so that he is now no more considered as unknown. So وَلَيْسَ مُرَادُهُ أَن يَكُونَ لِلْحَدِيثِ رَاوِيَانِ. His intention is not that the report has to have two narrators. It's not that the hadith has to have two narrators. فهو خلاف الواقع في المصادر وفي مستدرك الحاكم نفسه, because this here contradicts what we find in all the sources and also in Hakim's own mustadrak. So he says, فَكَانَ عَلَى الْحَافِظ أَلَّا يُورِدَ كَلَامَهُ هُنَا. It was incumbent upon Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah that he did not mention these words here. Basically, he's trying to say that this objection of Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah, or this attribution of Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah, for Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah to claim that Imam Hakim rahimahullah held this view is incorrect, and it was not correct for him to cite his words here. So even from the way that Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah quoted the statement of Imam Hakim rahimahullah, we understand that he is not discussing about the narration having a minimum of two narrators, but rather is what he's mentioning, that it's necessary that there have to be two people in general who transmitted from that particular sahabi. So this is the way in which Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah quoted the statement. But if we turn back to the original source and we look at the direct and the exact words, then we find that Imam Hakim rahimahullah, he actually said, وَصِفَةُ الْحَدِيثِ الصَّحِيحِ, that the quality of a sahih hadith, أَن يَرْوِيَهُ عَنْ رَسُولِ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمْ صَحَابِيٌّ زَائِلٌ عَنْهُ اسْمُ الْجَهَالَةِ, that it is a companion whose identity is removed from ignorance, meaning a companion who is known, he narrates it from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now then he says, وَهُوَ أَن يَرْوِيَ عَنْهُ تَابِعِيَّانِ عَدْلَانِ. And how would it be? So it's very clear when you're looking at his exact words here. And it is how does it become such that the Sahabi becomes known? It is that two tabi'in, they narrate from him. ثم يتداول أهل الحديث بالقبول إلى وقتنا هذا. And then the people of Hadith circulated what? Acceptance until our time. So these are the exact words in Ma'arifah Ulum al-Hadith. So it's very clear that Imam Hakim rahimahullah is trying to establish that a Sahabi should not be someone who is unknown. So it must be, the Sahabi must be known. Now how would we establish his identity? So to establish his identity, the Sahabi must have at least two students in general, even if they are both not narrating this particular narration. So one student could have transmitted another narration from him. For example, say one student of the Sahabi could have heard a narration from that Sahabi in the year 15 Hijri. And then another student could have heard a different narration, so not the same narration, a different narration in the year 60 Hijri. So this year will be sufficient. That now we'll say the Sahabi is known. So Mullah Ali Qari rahimahullah, he explains this in detail in his commentary, and I'll just go through the Arabic because we're already now over time. وتوضيحه أن كلام الحاكم يحتمل احتمالين أحدهما أن يكون الضمير في قوله أن يكون له راويا راجعان إلى الحديث. So this is in contrast to what we explained. This is the one possibility that you say that the marja of the dhamir is returning back to the word hadith, that hadith have to have two narrators. ويكون الباء في قوله بأن يكون بمعنى مع. فعلى هذا, if you consider this meaning, then what is it going to mean? الصحيح الذي رواه عن الصحابي المشهور بالرواية راويان ورواه عن هذين الراويين أربعة وهلم جرة ولا يخفى بعده. He's saying بعده. He's saying that it's not hidden how far-fetched this meaning is. So then I will look at that second meaning. And what's the second meaning? He says وثانيهما أن يكون الضمير راجعا إلى الصحابي. فعلى هذا الصحيح الذي رواه الصحابي المشهور بأن يكون له راويان وإن كان يروي الحديث عنه أحدهما وكذلك كل من يروي عنه راويان وإن كان يروي الحديث عنه أحدهما ويكون الغرض من هذا الشرط تزكية الراويين. So this is objective is to establish the credibility of the two narrators. واشتهار ذلك الحديث بصدوره عن قوم مشهورين بالحديث والرواية عن مشهورين بهما وهذا هو الظاهر. This is the apparent meaning وهو المعتمد عند أهل الحديث على الصحيح. So can you understand what Imam Hakim rahimahullah is trying to say? Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah, he misquoted him and he did not understand his intent correctly. So therefore this sentence of Nuzha an-Naḍar is incorrect. Ibn Hajar rahimahullah, he also used the word yumi'u. So this means that he acknowledges that the statement of Imam Hakim rahimahullah only indicates towards that view. It does not clearly denote upon it. Now once you understood the correct meaning of Imam Hakim rahimahullah, then it is important to know that even with this correct explanation and understanding, the statement itself remains incorrect. So it's not necessary for a Sahabi to have two narrators or two students in general in order for a narration to be authentic. So still the statement of Imam Hakim rahimahullah deserves to be rejected. So in short, irrespective of which meaning of Imam Hakim rahimahullah you're taking, the view presented is incorrect. فَأَحْلَاهُمَا مُرْ. The sweetest of both of them is bitter. Interestingly, there's another statement which is very similar, and Ibn Hajar rahimahullah understood that statement of Imam Hakim rahimahullah correctly. So Imam Hakim rahimahullah, basically he has two statements. There are two statements of Imam Hakim. So the first is this that we just quoted concerning the condition of a narration being sahih. This here is in his book Ma'arifa Ulum al-Hadith. Then there is another statement of his, and the second statement is in another book of his, Al-Madkhal ila Kitab al-Iklil. So there in Al-Madkhal ila Kitab al-Iklil he mentions the conditions of Imam Bukhari and Imam Muslim. So now he's no more talking as a condition of a narration to be sahih. Rather he's speaking about one of the conditions of Imam Bukhari and Imam Muslim rahimahullah. So he says, وَالصَّحِيحُ مِنَ الْحَدِيثِ مُنْقَسِمٌ عَلَى عَشَرَةِ أَقْسَامٍ. That authentic narrations is divided into 10 types. خمسة متفق عليها وخمسة منها مختلف فيها. 5 of them are agreed upon and 5 of them there is a dispute concerning them. فالقسم الأول من المتفق عليها اختيار البخاري ومسلم. So remember this, write it down or keep it in your mind, that he's saying the first type that is agreed upon is that which Imam Bukhari rahimahullah and Imam Muslim rahimahullah preferred and chose. وهو الدرجة الأولى من الصحيح. And that is the highest category, the first degree of authenticity. So whatever Imam Bukhari and Imam Muslim rahimahullah have transmitted, that's the highest category of Sahih. This is what what Imam Hakim rahimahullah is mentioning, although that is not entirely correct. But nevertheless, this we are talking now about the view of Imam Hakim rahimahullah. So he is mentioning that if Imam Bukhari and Imam Muslim rahimahullah transmitted a hadith, then this is not only authentic, وهو الدرجة الأولى من الصحيح. And what he gives an example. ومثاله الحديث الذي يرويه الصحابي المشهور بالرواية عن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. So it's a narration that which a famous companion narrated it. from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. وَلَهُ رَاوِيَانِ ثِقَتَانِ, and for him are two trustworthy narrators. ثم يرويه عنه التابعي المشهور بالرواية عن الصحابة وله راويان ثقتان. ثم يرويه عنه من أتباع التابعين الحافظ المتقن المشهور وله رواة ثقات من الطبقة الرابعة. So now it's no more راويان. Now from the in the أتباع التابعين, from them they have to have many narrators. ثم يكون شيخ البخاري أو مسلم حافظا متقنا مشهورا بالعدالة في روايته فهذه الدرجة الأولى من الصحيح. So this is another statement of Imam Hakim rahimahullah, but this statement of his is also incorrect. Ibn Tahir al-Maqdisi rahimahullah, he refuted this by saying, الجواب أن البخاري ومسلم لم يشترطا هذا الشرط ولا نقل عن واحد منهما أنه قال ذلك. The response is that Imam Bukhari and Imam Muslim rahimahumullah, they did not stipulate this condition, and nor was it reported from one amongst them that they mentioned it. والحاكم قدر هذا التقدير وشرط لهما هذا الشرط على ما ظن. He mentions this in شروط الأئمة الستة, which is printed the ثلاث رسائل. It's on page 96. Ibn Tahir Maqdisi rahmallah, he then presents examples of numerous Sahaba from whom Imam Bukhari rahmallah narrated, yet only one student narrated from them. So Imam Bukhari is narrating from them, but they only have one Sahabi who is transmitting from them. So he takes names such as Mirdas al-Aslami and Musayyab ibn Hazan and Amr ibn Taghlib, etc. And then Ibn Tahir Maqdisi rahimahullah, he also offers examples of Sahaba from whom Imam Muslim rahimahullah narrated, yet only one student narrated from them. So he mentions names like Aghar al-Muzani and Abu Rifa' al-Adawi and Rafi' ibn Amr al-Ghifari and Rabi' ibn Ka'b al-Aslami radiyallahu anhum. So after quoting all of this in the footnotes of Shurut al-Aimma al-Khamsa on page 115, Alama Kawthari rahimahullah, he said, وَأَصَابَ ابْنُ طَاهِرْ فِي هَذَا التَّعَقُّبِ, that Ibn Tahir rahimahullah, he was correct in this objection. So these are just a few Sahaba. Imam Zahabi rahimahullah, he mentions the names of 10 Sahaba from whom Imam Bukhari rahimahullah narrated. So he mentions this here in Sirah Alam al-Nubala, that ذكر الصحابة الذين أخرج لهم البخاري ولم يروي عنهم سوى واحد مرداس الأسلمي عنه قيس بن حازم. So that's the only one person narrated from him, قيس بن حازم. Likewise حزن المخزومي تفرد عنه ابنه أبو سعيد المسيب ibn Hazan. So that's the second, Zahir ibn al-Aswad. So inshallah we'll put the entire quotation in the notes because time is up already. I won't quote the whole thing. So this proves that there are Sahaba who only had one student narrating from them, yet Imam Bukhari rahimullah quoted from them. But now, just as Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah misunderstood the first statement of Imam Hakim rahimahullah, Alama Hazmi rahimahullah misunderstood the second statement that Imam Hakim rahimahullah mentioned in Al-Madkhal. So he said, وَأَمَّا قَوْلُ الْحَاكِمِ فِي الْقِسْمِ الْأَوَّلِ إِنَّ اخْتِيَارَ الْبُخَارِيِّ وَمُسْلِمٍ إِخْرَاجُ الْحَدِيثِ عَنْ عَدْلَيْنِ إِلَى النَّبِيِّ صلى الله عليه وسلم فَهَذَا غَيْرُ صَحِيحٌ طَرْدًا وَعَكْسًا. So he assumed that how Ibn Hajar rahimahullah is claiming here that Imam Hakim rahimahullah was of the view that there must be two people narrating from two people, then only the narration will be sahih. Alama Hazmi rahimahullah, he understood that there must be two people narrating from two people, then only would Imam Bukhari and Imam Muslim rahimahullah narrate from them. So as you can see, Alama Hazmi rahimahullah, he understood that the meaning of the second statement is that each narrator of Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim must have two narrators. And this here is obviously incorrect because Imam Hakim rahimahullah, he did not say that. So Shaykh Abdul Fattah Abu Ghudda rahimahullah, he comments on the statement of Alama Hazmi rahimahullah, saying عزو الحازمي إلى الحاكم أنه قال في القسم الأول إن اختيار البخاري ومسلم إخراج الحديث عن عدلين إلى النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم غير صحيح فلم يقل الحاكم هذا لا في المدخل ولا في معرفة علوم الحديث. So you can refer to pages 130 to 134 of ثلاث رسائل for more detail. And then in the footnotes, Allama Kawthari rahimahullah mentions that this was also the view of Imam Bayhaqi rahimahullah. But in order to prove it, he uses the following statement of Imam Bayhaqi rahimahullah, which he mentions in his Sunan al-Kubra in volume 4 on page 105. فَأَمَّا الْبُخَارِيُّ وَمُسْلِمٌ رَحِمَهُمُ اللَّهِ فَإِنَّهُمَا لَمْ يُخَرِّجَاهُ جريا على عادتهما في أن الصحابية أو التابعية إذا لم يكن له إلا راو واحد لم يخرجا حديثه في الصحيحين. So these are the exact words of Imam Bayhaqi rahimahullah. So Imam Bayhaqi rahimahullah, he intended the same as what Imam Hakim rahimahullah mentioned, that Imam Bukhari and Imam Muslim rahimahullah, they stipulated that a narrator must be famous. And how will he be famous? It will be famous that two narrators quote from him. So it does not mean that every narration must have at least two narrators. And therefore, in the footnotes, Shaykh Abdul Fattah Abu Ghudda rahimahullah, he claimed that this here is not correct to attribute to Imam Bayhaqi rahimahullah. And then Allama Kawthari rahimahullah, he also states that Ibn al-Arabi rahimahullah held the same view. So Ibn Hajar rahimahullah, he brings the statement of Ibn al-Arabi rahimahullah in the text ahead, the next lines that we're going to read. So inshallah we'll discuss it in detail. But regarding the second statement of al-Madkhal, which I just quoted to you now. So Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah, he understood the statement of Imam Hakim rahimahullah correctly. So in his Nukat he wrote, وَالظَّاهِرُ أَنَّ الْحَاكِمْ لَمْ يُرِدْ ذَلِكَ, that Imam Hakim did not intend that what Imam Hazmi rahimahullah is saying. وَإِنَّمَا أَرَادَ كل راو في الكتابين من الصحابة فمن بعدهم يشترط أن يكون له راويان في الجملة لا أنه يشترط أن يتفقا في رواية ذلك الحديث بعينه عنه. So you can see that is clearly mentioned يشترط أن يكون له راويان في جملة. That is conditional, that for him is two narrators in general, in total. لا أنه يشترط أن يتفقا في رواية ذلك الحديث بعينه عنه. He did not stipulate that they two narrators transmit that very narration from him. Now, just think about the outcome and the implication of the statement of Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah. So here you'll just have to apply your mind a little bit. I know it's getting so late, but inshallah it will strengthen your mind also. So we are going to be slightly technical here and prove how Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah, by mentioning this explanation in his Nukat, he too would have to agree that what's mentioned here in Nuzha an-Naḍar, what he mentioned here in Nuzha an-Naḍar is incorrect. So in this statement that I quoted now from Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah, Ibn Hajar is agreeing that Imam Hakim did not claim that Imam Bukhari and Imam Muslim stipulated that a narration has to be transmitted through two companions. But I told you, Imam Hakim rahimahullah, he knew that everything in Sahih al-Bukhari is authentic. So that means Imam Bukhari and Imam Muslim, they transmitted narrations which were only transmitted by one person. But he's saying that everything in Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim is authentic. So what's the natural outcome? That there are authentic narrations with only one chain, isn't it? Indirectly, it means that it is not a condition that a narration can only be authentic if it is Azīz. Do you understand? So let me explain it again in this way. Ibn Hajar rahimahullah knew that Imam Hakim rahimahullah was of the opinion that Imam Bukhari rahimahullah and Imam Muslim rahimahullah, they only narrated authentic narrations. Right, so this here is the first point. So process and digest this point. That Imam Hakim knew that Imam Bukhari and Imam Muslim, they only narrated authentic narrations. Now let us proceed to the second point. Every narration of Bukhari and Muslim has to fulfill the conditions of Sahih. Then only it can be that Imam Bukhari rahimahullah and Imam Muslim rahimahullah narrated authentic narrations. So process that point, that in order for Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim to be authentic, the narrations have to fulfill each and every condition. So for example, for a narration to be authentic, the narration must have reliable narrators. So this means that every narration of Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim has reliable narrators. Likewise, for a narration to be authentic, the narration must have a chain with no missing links. So that means that there is no narration of Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim that has any missing links. So that's the second point. Now the third point. by accepting that Imam Bukhari rahimahullah and Imam Muslim rahimahullah are not stringent in narrating ahadith that are Azīz, this automatically means that a narration does not have to be Azīz in order to be Sahih. Otherwise, it's going to mean that Imam Bukhari and Imam Muslim are narrating ahadith which are not transmitted by two people. So you're going to be left with one of two scenarios. Either you will have to claim that that narration is weak, even though it comes in Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim. That means everything in Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim is not authentic. Obviously, Imam Hakim was not of this view. So then the second possibility is that that narration is authentic and Imam Bukhari and Imam Muslim rahimahullah have narrated it. So do you understand how the statement of Nukat will contradict this explanation in Nuzha? Otherwise, the narrations that Imam Bukhari and Imam Muslim narrated that are only transmitted by one Sahabi would not be authentic. So in short, the statement of Ma'rifa Ulum al-Ḥadīth that Ibn Hajar rahimahullah quoted here, it cannot be used to prove that Imam Hakim rahimahullah stipulated that a narration has to be Azīz, and only then will a narration be Sahih. Furthermore, the statement of al-Madkhal ila Kitab al-Iklil, it cannot be used to prove that Imam Bukhari rahimahullah and Imam Muslim rahimahullah were of the view that a narration has to be Azīz, then only they would narrate it in their Sahih. Combining these two statements, it means that Imam Hakim rahimahullah was not of the view that a narration has to be Sahih. Now again here, even with the correct understanding of the statements of Imam Hakim rahimahullah, it will still be incorrect. But now to make a complete U-turn, there is another statement of Imam Hakim rahimahullah that has been transmitted by Allama Sijzi rahimahullah. So in his Suwalat, he quoted Imam Hakim rahimahullah as saying, وَسَمِعْتُ يَقُول, and Allama Sijzi is a reliable person. He's saying that I heard with my own ears. The man said, مِنْ شَرْطِ الْبُخَارِيِّ فِي الصَّحِيحِ أَنَّ الْحَدِيث لَا يُشْتَهَرَ عِنْدَهُ إِلَّا بِثِقَتَيْنِ يَتَّفِقَانِ عَلَى رِوَايَتِهِ. And I heard him saying, from the conditions of Bukhari in his Sahih is that a report is not is that أن الصحيح لا يشتهر عنده, a narration would not be considered as مشهور according to him إلا بثقتين يتفقان على روايته, except if you have two trustworthy narrators who agree upon narrating it. So this is precisely regarding what Allama Hazmi rahimahullah criticized Imam Hakim rahimahullah for. So if we look at this statement individually, and if Allama Hazmi rahimahullah quoted this particular statement, and then he mentioned his exact objection, then his objection would be valid. Nonetheless, ultimately, in his Mustadrak, Imam Hakim rahimahullah, he clearly narrated a sanad, and thereafter he clarified this whole matter. So he quoted the sanad, أخبرنا إبراهيم بن عصمة بن إبراهيم العدل قال حدثني أبي قال حدثنا يحيى بن يحيى أبا يزيد بن المقدام بن شريح بن هاني عن المقدام عن أبيه عن هاني. So remember the name Hani, and remember that it's the son of Hani narrating from him. And then he quotes the hadith أنه لما وفد على رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال يا رسول الله أي شيء يوجب الجنة قال عليك بحسن الكلام وبذل الطعام. So after quoting this here, Imam Hakim rahimahullah said, هذا حديث مستقيم وليس له علة ولم يخرجاه. That this here is a perfect narration. There is no defect. But Imam Bukhari and Imam Muslim rahimahullah have not narrated it. والعلة عندهما فيه أن هاني ابن يزيد ليس له راو غير ابنه شريح. The only probable or possible issue they could have with this here is that Hani, no one narrates from him besides his son Shurih. وقد قدمت الشرط في أول هذا الكتاب أن الصحابي المعروف إذا لم نجد له راويا غير تابعين واحد معروف احتجنا به. So you can see احتججنا به, that if there's only one person narrating from his sahabi, then too it's fine, we can quote that narration. وصححنا حديثه إذ هو صحيح على شرطهما جميعا. Then look at his words, فإن البخاري قد احتج بحديث قيس بن أبي حازم عن مرداس الأسلمي عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم يذهب الصالحون, واحتج بحديث قيس عن عدي بن عمير عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم وإن استعملناه على عمل. So he's quoting now that Imam Bukhari rahimahullah rahimahullah has accepted narrations which only one person, when there's only one narrator in general from the Sahabi. And he's clearly mentioned before that if there's only one person who is narrating from a Sahabi, the narration will be authentic. Likewise, he says, وَكَذَلِكَ مُسْلِمٌ قَدْ احْتَجَّ بِأَحَادِيثِ أَبِي مَالِكَ الْأَشْجَعِ عَنْ أَبِيهِ. So he's quoting now ahadith from